Hey everyone, Rascally Rasmus here. It's been a while, but it's good to be back. I hope everyone's doing well. Today we're going to be talking about some tips for Tainted Grail, the Fall of Avalon. And so let's just get straight into it. Initially, I'd like to talk a bit about the game's difficulty, and I'd say Tainted Grail is a fairly difficult game. You definitely need to dodge and parry and stuff like that. And so when I started the game, I chose hard difficulty, and that was a pretty brutal experience. But it got easier as I got more powerful, leveled up. And so I'd actually ended up really liking the difficulty curve of playing on hard. That being said, you can change the difficulty at any time, so just pick whatever you think is right and you can always adjust it. You can also, if you encounter a boss that's too difficult, just turn it down for that boss if you don't like beating your head against the wall. An extension of talking about the difficulty, to be able to manage these harder difficulties, it's quite important to learn how to dodge and parry. For dodging, you have these charges you can see in the bottom left corner, and you have 3 as a baseline. They obviously still cost stamina, but after using up your charges, your dodges become a lot shorter, so your dodging becomes fairly weak. So it's pretty important to manage your charges. And as you can see, once you let the cooldown recover, you get all your charges back. So you can go 3 charges, and then you wait out the cooldown fully, and then you get all charges back. So that's something that's very important to stay alive. The other thing is to be able to parry properly. Parrying is not necessary, you can just go with dodging, but parrying is strictly better if you're good at it. And so I struggled quite a bit with parrying early on because I for some reason thought that just holding my right click at the right time would also parry if I did it at the right time. But a parry will only happen if you tap your right click. If you hold it, it will go immediately into a block. And while blocking is okay, it reduces some of the damage you take, it doesn't negate the damage fully like parrying. And there's a wolf over here, and I'm gonna go over, and I'm probably gonna fail the parry because, yeah, it's a video. But so anyways, when he attacks, you tap, and that will block him. And it's also really important to keep an eye on your stamina as you're playing the game, because yeah, as you can see now, I'm out, which basically leaves me extremely vulnerable to damage. Also, an extension of the difficulty, I just want to point out that certain debuffs are extremely strong. I really like freezing enemies. In the early access, the freeze is a bit wonky. Sometimes you'll see enemies just flying off the screen, and so that can be a bit annoying, but it can really enable you to take down some very powerful foes by basically just stun locking them with freezes. Like this bear is frozen now, and I can essentially just freeze him again, and he will just remain frozen forever. You can also do a mix of this and then a big powerful attack. They take more damage when you break the freeze enemies, so that can be pretty helpful. Another really helpful debuff is bleed. I have bleed on my spear here, and bleed will stack indefinitely as long as you keep the buff going. So if you're fighting a really beefy enemy, bleed can be extremely good at taking down a very large health bar as long as you make sure you never drop the stacks. And so I think as a baseline it lasts like 1.5 or 2 seconds. And so it does become kind of a balancing act of making sure you have enough stamina, having enough dodges ready, but also always hitting the enemies if you're going for a bleed build. So another thing that was a big struggle early on in the game was to be able to sustain my health. Early on, your healing potions and your food is pretty scarce. So it can be a bit of a struggle keeping up your health, especially if you're not so good at parrying or just simply don't get it at all like me. So I'd recommend early on getting this spell called Soul Salvage, which when you heavy cast it will allow you to remove a targeted summon but restore health based on the summon's current health. So if I summon a skeleton here and I then heavy cast my Soul Salvage, I will basically heal up. And so as soon as I got this combination of spells, the game became a lot easier because I no longer had to expend any resources on managing my health in between enemy fights. And I could instead utilize my food and my potions only for the actual difficult fights where I needed them. And so you can get Soul Salvage in a few different places. But the easiest, I think, is to go to the Miner's Tunnel, which is located up here. And then inside the Miner's Tunnel in a crate, you'll find Soul Salvage, but you'll also find a summoning spell that summons a wolf. So you can go there basically immediately. So pretty early on in the game, I started encountering these plain unidentified items. And they tell you how to identify them. And that's fairly simple. You put down a bonfire by pressing Q if you're on PC, and you can place it. And to then identify, you have to fuel the bonfire with ethereal cobweb. And so I was pretty confused on how to get this ethereal cobweb, especially early on. But it's actually fairly simple to get. You can both find it scattered around the map, but the most consistent way of getting it is to go out and slay enemies at night, because at night all the enemies turn into weirdness affected enemies, and these enemies drop cobweb. And it's these same enemies that can also drop these unidentified items. So you can basically go out at night to farm better items. And so these unidentified items will basically just give you random items, and these can be really good items, and they can also just be junk. In extension of that, I'd strongly recommend that when you do it, you should do it in bulk, because you have this initial cost of fueling the bonfire with 10 cobweb. And once you've done that, you can identify multiple items, which then cost cobweb per item you identify as well. So in this case, it costs 3 cobweb to identify this item, and I got some junk. I'd recommend doing it in bulk so you save on the cobweb, but also I'd recommend making sure you do it close to a merchant, because these items can be heavy if you do a lot. So you should ideally do it right outside the city or near another merchant or close to your stash. And so speaking of stash, I should also mention that there is a stash in the game, because that was something I wondered early on, because my inventory got extremely full with stuff I actually wanted to keep around. And so here in the Horns of the South, in the back here by Field Gas, you have the stash over here, and the stash has unlimited space. So next I want to talk a bit about respeccing, because as always, I really like experimenting in games and trying to do my own builds. And so I'm very happy that respeccing is pretty easily accessible in this game. It doesn't really have a cost, you just need one of these potions. But the origin potions allow you to respec both your stat points and your skill points. And you get a few of these in the tutorial, if depending on how much you loot. And aside from that, you can find them from unidentified items in the world at night. So there's not a limited amount of them. You can get more, even if you've found every single one that's placed around the map. If you hit a oh shit moment and you made a really bad build and you need a potion, then there is one located in here in the center, basically. Not in the city, but you go down here to the sunken village and then follow the beach around, and then you go through here, and in the very back here there is a corpse of a fallen keeper, and he has a potion of origin on him. Next, a quick tip for the weapon loadouts is that you can use the same item in multiple weapon loadouts. So currently I'm using my Hexbound wand in both my Frost spell loadout and in my Fire spell loadout. So you can technically use the same spell if you really like it in all of your different weapon loadouts. My next tip is to also pay attention to the merchants. I just now discovered that Oleath here, okay, I butchered that pronunciation, but anyway, she sells this sketchbook, which allows you to sketch things, and so that's pretty cool. But what I really was going to say is that up here in the, what is this place even called? The All-Mother's Temple, the merchant up here called, I've written it down, but I probably can't pronounce it either, Ukwe, sells an item that permanently increases one of your attributes by 1 point, so for 2,500 crowns, so you can basically get a free stat level up by purchasing that. Well, not free because it costs crowns, but you know. The point is, keep an eye on the merchants. Don't sleep on their inventory, because they might have some good stuff like, well, I don't know how good this really is, but it is cool. I also want to point out, this is fairly obvious, but that by using your different abilities, you do level them up. So by using one-handed weapons, you do increase your one-handed damage. And same with two-handed. By running, you do increase your sprint and swim speed. With athletics, and whenever you level up one of these skills, you also get a chunk of experience. So leveling up different things or playing in different ways can be a good way to level up fast. As you can see, I've used no heavy armor, so that would be a pretty good way to get some relatively quick experience. You might also have noticed my little pet here. He doesn't really do anything, but if you'd like one for yourself, I got him by going into this cave, the Shrine of the Forgotten God. And you simply scale this mountain. You can do it very early on. And when in there, you can find a little egg. And once you walk 5,000 steps with this egg, you can open your inventory and you can use the egg as a consumable. And then it will hatch into this little guy that will then be following you. Not necessarily very useful, but he is kind of cute, I guess. And I guess you can also do a trick here. Oh. Next up, I'd also strongly recommend that you interact with the shrines around the world. You have the Shrine of the Deer is a really good one because it gives you movement speed just by giving it 3 antler pieces. And so when you see deer around the world, you should definitely make sure you take them down because this is a permanent movement speed increase. You also have the Shrine of the Bear, which is somewhere up here, which gives you some more permanent physical damage. And there's a few more shrines around the world. The Druidic shrines are also really good because you can give them 1 monster part for 10 experience. So you should always be picking up all monster parts for just a bunch of free experience. And these you can just turn in at will. Do keep in mind that monster parts can also be useful for crafting. So think a bit about whether you want to use them for crafting before you just give them all away. Aside from shrines, you should also be paying attention to statues, as these can also give you a skill up. For instance, I have one here. I can't even remember what he gave me, but they typically gave you a skill up in whatever skill that's relevant. So this was likely one-handed melee weapons. There's also one for archery and so on, so you can get some free skill up from the statues. I also quickly want to talk about armor weight, because the heavier your armor is, the worse your movement speed is, your stamina regeneration, the fewer dashes you have, and so on. And so currently there's a breakpoint here and there's a breakpoint here. So you have heavy, medium, and light armor. So if I remove stuff such as this helm, so I go under heavy, you can see I will gain an additional dash charge and I will have no movement speed penalties. If I remove more stuff, I will eventually drop down to light armor, and at this point I will have more dashes and increased movement speed. So this is also something to keep in mind based on what kind of playstyle you would like. And speaking of armor, we should also talk about upgrading your armor. If you're feeling weak, I'd strongly recommend upgrading your armor because that can significantly improve how strong you're feeling. At the grindstone here in the city, you can go and you can do armor weight reduction. So with materials and crowns, you can reduce the weight of your armor quite significantly. You can also upgrade your armor to simply increase or weapons to simply add more damage or armor to your armor. And so that's also really helpful. And you can also attach relics, which are also very strong. And so by attaching relics, you find these relics around the world, but they add some pretty nice multipliers. For instance, this one is obviously extremely strong with 10% extra weapon damage. So adding relics to your weapons and armor can be really nice. This also does cost money, but it costs no additional resources. Lastly, I also want to talk a bit about crafting, and this goes both for crafting armor, but also for crafting potions or cooking. And what I want to point out here is that currently over here, you can see this is the expected outcome of my craft, which is a broken item. And it's showing here that we have a 61% chance that this is what we'll get if we craft, and a 38% chance that we'll get something better. So this is affected both by our handcrafting skill, which is really low, but also by the materials we put in. So if I choose to put more materials in, it will essentially increase the likelihood of a better outcome. So by adding more iron here, it will increase to now being a 51% chance that we'll get this weak corpse eater's cap. And by increasing it more, we'll eventually get it to being the expected outcome being a corpse eater's cap, and is eventually a +1 or +2 corpse eater's cap. This also goes for healing potions or the food you cook. You can see here under the expected outcome that the chance for worse is 28% and the chance for better is 17%. This is just to say that keep in mind that sometimes it's worth pouring more resources into your craft because you want to get as good as craft as possible. You can also just do the gamble and go with only the required resources, and if I craft this, I actually still ended up with a weak corpse eater's cap, despite the most likely chance would be a broken item. Aside from that, it should just be mentioned that from the merchants, you can also buy recipes. You also sometimes find them in the world. And when you find a recipe like this, it's not enough to just buy it. It's important that you also read it. You don't have to actually read it, but you have to open it to actually learn the craft. So don't accidentally not learn your recipes. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I have more videos in the pipelines. Next, I'm probably going to do some tips for Tinkerlands, which I'm pretty excited about. And I'm also really excited about Fall of Avalon's full release. So yeah, thank you so much and have a very nice day. Until next time.